Ashley, for some reason, I can't get everybody. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. Welcome to our, I guess it is second annual After the Future School webinar to bring together our Future School alumni and possibly future participants to share in perspectives learnings, implementing foresight as a core competency. My name is Dawn Valle, and I'm the Director, Division of Library Development at the Connecticut State Library. And I'm joined by my one of my team members, Ashley Sklar, who many of you might have had the pleasure of talking to. But also, we're so happy to have our partners here, Nicole Baker-Rosa, Head of Human Design from the Future School, and our esteemed keynote, Yvette Montero-Salvico, who will be just sharing all the amazingness with you. Let's go ahead and we are joined today with by 6 panel speakers. Did I count right? Or maybe it's 5, who are going to share their opportunities and challenges and implementation about what they took from the Future School and how they see as implementing all the tools, resources, and training that they've received. Brief agenda, my welcome going on right now. And I would be remiss to say that none of this would not be possible without the support of the Institute of Museums and Library Services, for which the Connecticut State Library received a Laura Bush 21st Century Programming Grant, Transformation for Libraries, the Future School. So we have to always acknowledge our funders. And there I am, Dawn, and next to me is Nicole. I am going to turn it over to at this time to Nicole Baker-Rosa. Nicole?
She may not be able to unmute.
There we go. I got the powers now. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to see familiar faces on the screen. And if you're hearing this all for the first time, welcome, and we hope to see you soon. I can't start speaking about this work without acknowledging Dawn, because when we close our eyes and we kind of illustrate and describe the perfect partner, it is her and her team. She's this incredible mix of, she believes the work, it's innately within her, but she's also a doer. She's an influencer and she makes things happen. So to bridge both of those worlds and continue to have this partnership and just the honor to work with her and her team is incredible. So thank you, Dawn. It's also an honor to be returning and having these conversations with each of you, and the privilege to host these cohorts. Librarians are some of our favorite participants to work with. We get to, come with you, 30 of you each time, and have these experiences which take their own shape. But you've all seen that we believe that the world would be a better place if everybody was equipped with this type of thinking and everyone was empowered to be a futurist. And so each of you, whether it's in an academic or a public institution, whatever type of library you work with, you are trusted. You have relationships. People come to you to access the correct type of information and just to come to you to guide them. And so you're at the forefront and you have this incredibly, and I know challenging often, responsibility to guide these individuals. But what better kind of profits, if you will, to be at the forefront with those relationships and those connections that you have, to speak this new language and practice this new language of foresight. And speaking of a new language is hard, right? You have to practice it. And, think back to your maybe college days where you were said to study abroad, if you learned a new language, or Maybe you're learning a new language, a spoken language now, and you study your Rosetta Stone or all of those different platforms. What do they tell you when you learn a language, right? Go to the culture, experience it, practice it, eat the food, our love language, connect, experience. And so that's your responsibility now. You have to put it into practice or you'll lose it. Take those leaps, have those conversations, see who gets curious, learn from the questions that they ask you. Know that you can start small. You don't have to go all the way to scenarios. There's small successes that you can have in this journey. So as you hear these stories today, I just want you to recommit to yourself. Remember, when you were at the end and you were excited and you said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to implement this right away or speak to these co-conspirators. Recommit to that. When we survey all of you, we found that 80% wanted to continue to do this work. And that more than half of you felt that you could have an impact, small or large, with this new methodology, this experience, this skill set, this mindset that you've accomplished. So before we hear the particular stories, I just want to share with you some of the specific testimonials that we heard from you. First of all, we have 10 people, about 10, who have gone on and certified their knowledge after the program. But these are some of the kind of integration points you all mentioned to us after the fact. You want to use this work to influence where your library is headed. You want to rethink how we work in the library and in our team. I want to use this to develop myself as a leader. Somebody even mentioned that they were just promoted to a director level and they didn't feel like they had built-in training, and this was kind of the guidance that they needed at this time in this space. Another individual was a board member, and they now had a way to influence those other board members to really work towards the vision and challenge the vision. They wanted a new way to round out and build their teams. Many talked about kind of those art quizzes, right? Those adaptive, resilient, transformative leaders. And maybe most important, it was to give us a voice, give librarians a voice. So just remember, recommit, practice your language. And I know that Yvette is going to follow up with even more depth, I'm sure, around all of that. And it's really my privilege to introduce one of she and Frank are my top futurists, but not only are they mine, but Yvette is recognized as one of the top 50 female futurists in the world. And where she started was she was Disney's first workforce futurist. So she was responsible for launching what Foresight looked like at the Walt Disney Company and set the charter for that. And then we got to steal her and have her as our own. And now she leads, all of you through these experiences. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Yvette.
Oh, thanks, Nicole. That's awfully sweet. That was such a nice intro. We don't get to often do that. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, incredible panelists, of course. Thank you to our funders and our grant providers. I am so excited and privileged to be with you all for a few minutes today. Actually, I'll stick around for the full program, but you'll hear me speak for just a few minutes this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm going to steal the sharing function, if that's okay, from you all, and hopefully y'all can see my screen. I do have just a few slides to go through. I'm going to chat with y'all for about 20 minutes or so. Some of it might be review from what you heard at the Future School, but it's my experience that, hearing these things a few times does not hurt. And depending on where you are, what your gap is at the moment, where your heart is, where your head is, you're going to hear different things will stick. And so I'm excited to talk to you today about 3 ways the future will surprise you. And we know that the future is often unexpected, and that can be, collectively something that's overwhelming. But we know that collectively we can also imagine more equitable futures. And there's no better group than librarians and individuals involved in this space to be able to collectively transform communities to become more equitable. I think it is incredibly timely that we gather here right after a midterm election where we saw such a strong voice of democracy, so many people going out to vote and have their voice heard. And similarly, we can create a collective voice around the future using libraries and the services you all provide as the epicenter of that. So we'll talk about these 3 ways. Think of them as outside in, people, and push and pull. You already know me, so we'll skip ahead. And you know that our mission here at the Future School is to democratize the field of foresight. And you all are an integral part of that mission. It's been years now that we've been partnering with the libraries, and you are our essential foot soldiers out there. And it's so exciting to continue this partnership to support each and every one of you in your communities to make this a reality. Take these slides back with you, use them as another tool in your toolkit. You probably remember this slide gives you an overview of what foresight is. You all know this already, but I can share a little bit again. It's used across all domains. We use it for strategy, for innovation, for change, and for personal development. I know many of you feel personally developed having gone through these programs. Of course, we talk about natural foresight and about becoming more adaptive, resilient, and transformative, and creating communities that are more adaptive, resilient, and transformative. Question for all of you, and you could drop your answer in the chat if you are comfortable doing so. What are some of the constraints you're facing? What are some of the hurdles that you're facing, whether it's within your organization, your system, your community, your life, whatever you feel comfortable? Right now, Nicole and I are facing hurricane force winds, but we're here and we're present. No, luckily so far, so good. But Hurricane Nicole, I mean, literally, that's the name of the hurricane. So I didn't name it. Nicole didn't name it for sure. For sure, she didn't name it. But here we are. So what constraints? Time, money, too much to do, not enough staff retention, agreed time, lack of space, budget cuts, focus, buy-in from leaders at every level, money, capacity. Yes, 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 yes. I agree on all of these. And I think probably a lot of thumbs up. Inflation is a challenge for sure. So Nicole mentioned, obviously, my background at Disney. Here are some of the constraints that you all are probably facing still around COVID, around health and safety, around the supply chain, around talent retention, around Zoom and this virtual environment that we are still working through as well. But what if I could, wave a magic wand from Disney and eliminate all of those constraints? You had unlimited time, you had incredible buy-in, you had support, you had budget, you had resources, you had staff. If all those obstacles were removed and you could direct what is done, what would you do? And so if you have an answer for that, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We often find that this second question or response is harder than the first. Clearly, it's difficult to imagine a world where we don't have constraints, but this is such a critical part because while we're very good at making to-do lists, I am the queen of the to-do list, we have to recognize that if we're not cognizant and aware of the future we want to create, what our aspirational goal is, then how do we know that we even have the right things on our to-do list? So we have to make sure that while we're battling the fires and putting out fires and doing the things that we need to do every day to keep the lights on, that we're also working towards our aspirational visions about our community, about our organization. So we must be able to answer both of these questions. And the answer to the first should be, through the lens of the answer to the second. So our, communities, our teams are all really, when they think about the future, it impacts the actions they take in the present. How we see the future impacts our actions today. So if we're not dedicating time to strategic foresight, to thinking about the future, then it is impacting the actions we take. They're likely not setting us in the direction we want to go for that transformational vision. And that's one of the powers of strategic foresight, is linking the future to the present. So if we're lacking buy-in or support, we have to make sure we create that bridge between that future state and what we're doing today and recognize that those things are connected. So 3 ways the future will surprise us. I talked about outside in. The future happens from the outside in. The future is about people, and the future exists across the push and pull. Let's talk about each one of these briefly. The future happens from the outside in. This is a great way to explain to someone who is new to the concept of futures thinking and strategic foresight. When we say the future happens from the outside in, we're talking about this framework, the 3 environments that I know you all remember. In the center is my focal issue, my concern, the future of libraries, my organization, in that middle bullseye. Then we have the meta environment, the industry, the sector, and then that broad external environment where trends are born from those steep drivers, from the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political drivers. We know that our future disruptors and our future opportunities are much more likely to come from outside of our industry or our sector or our subject matter expertise than from within it. And this is why we have to scan broadly from that external environment. Harvard Business did a study where they showcased how coming up with innovative ideas requires us to look at these separate but analogous fields. They studied this challenge of carpenters, specifically around their respirator masks, and coming up with innovative ways to get more usage from carpenters on their safety respirator masks. So initially they asked roofers. Well, first of all, they asked carpenters. They came up with some good ideas. Roofers, a little bit more far away from carpenters, came up with some better ideas. And the best ideas came from skaters who also use safety equipment, but obviously aren't carpenters, right? So this is what Foresight allows us to do, to look in those outside in realms. Let's talk about a few of the trends that might on the surface feel like they are really out there, right? And then draw the line and the comparison and the direction and the impact back to libraries. Brain-to-brain interface. What? I barely can get Zoom to work, but now we're gonna interface brain to brain. Yes, it's true. We're already seeing experiments be successful around the ability to communicate directly brain to brain. What does that look like today? Today, it looks a lot like brain to computer interfacing, but we're very, very close. We're already seeing human trials around this type of collaboration and communication. And so as we see more advancements around these types of technology, what can that mean to library services, to knowledge, to sharing, to information? This could really change the game and make things much more accessible, but it also could be challenging in terms of misinformation directly going into people's brains. I mean, it's extreme, but we have to think about these implications. So this is a neuroscience trend that if we were scanning from the inside out, we would completely miss it. But we're scanning from the outside in, and we're thinking about these broad-based trends, and we're thinking about how can it impact my community? How can it impact libraries? What about radical life extension? How many of you would like to live to 130? No, maybe. Depends on the quality of life, maybe. Well, there are scientists working day in and day out right now to cure aging. They think living beyond 130, 180, maybe living forever is a complete possibility. What does that mean to how we approach some of the normal social things that we take for granted, like, jobs and marriage and the social safety net? What does it mean to live a life beyond 130 in terms of my life stages, about how I approach a career? This can truly impact the services you all provide, the communities that you serve. So just 2 examples of trends that we might identify looking from the outside in that have true implications to the future of libraries and to the present of libraries, if we think about the decisions we're making today and how they'll impact what services we provide. All right, so that's the future is outside in. The future is also about people. And I know you all know this better than anyone. Most people think about the future and they automatically think of the Jetsons and flying cars. But really, we know that trends don't get created in a petri dish. Trends emerge because people's values change. And you all might remember from the training that we talked about the life cycle of the trend. We know we see a trend when it's mainstream, but we have to backtrack to when those values are shifting, when there's just whispers about something. And so that's really important. Let's look at some of the trends that we're scanning around outside in that really to point to the people factor and the value shifts that are happening. First of all, values aren't what they used to be. We used to be able to point to religion or community or association for the development of our values and our value systems. That's no longer the case. As people collaborate online across geographies, we're seeing new digital values emerge. Some of them are at odds with our traditional values. You can see some of the headlines we've seen around this idea of digital values. You know, digital world is now our primary residence. When we spend more time online than in person, what does that do to our ability to collaborate and communicate and form relationships? I love this article called Turning Off and On Again. This idea that there's analogous behavior between our online and in-person interactions. And sometimes we have to reset in both cases. And just huge implications to what it means to interact racially, culturally, when we're spending so much time online. We're not just leaving those digital values online, we're taking them with us into the physical world. What does that mean to the services you all provide as librarians, to the communities that you serve? It's no longer a zip code that you're serving. You could potentially be serving anywhere across the globe. And so it's critically important to think about digital values. All right, the future is about people. What about this idea of robotics? That's not people-centric. No, but yes, right? Because we can talk about social robotics, and even robotics in general can definitely have an impact on human beings. When we think about social robotics, those are robots that take the place of traditionally human interaction, whether they're caretakers or support staff or support people in different elements. We know that robotics, AI is expanding greatly, and it's going to impact the services and the way that services are provided in our libraries. It's going to impact social connection, which is such a critical part of the ecosystem that libraries provide. And so I don't think we need to be scared of robotics or social robotics. It's about leveraging those tools, just like you all have leveraged every change and transformation that's come down the pike and transformed yourselves to incorporate those and to understand the challenges. So human robot relations, what does that mean for our libraries, our library staff? You all tell me. It would be an interesting, very interesting. Yeah, it could be a versus, Susan. Like, what does it mean? We hear all the time that AI is going to take over the futurist role. We know that that's not true because there's such a human element. AI has huge limitations. So where can we leverage AI to support what we're doing to allow us and free us up to do the more human-centric tasks? Okay, so the future happens from the outside in. The future is human, and it's about people. And then the future exists across the push and pull. Hopefully you all remember the push and pull. Remember that we can get infatuated with trends and emerging issues. Those are the things that are pushing us into the future, often kicking and screaming, right? Things like demographic changes and elections and pandemics and AI, right? And that's important. The push of the future, totally important, but we don't want to ignore the pull of the future. That represents our aspirations, our visions for the future, the answer to question 2, if you will, from the top of my presentation. And so we have to understand and know where we want to head, because we want to be able to pull ourselves, our communities, our libraries to that preferred future. But as you know from doing Foresight, that we can not only leverage the emerging issues and avoid the threats and pull ourselves to our preferred future, we can actually pull that future to today, because we're all creating the future every day with the actions we make and we take. So how can we do so more purposefully, more collaboratively, and with our aspirations in mind? We can do that by leveraging the tools of strategic foresight. Now that you all have been equipped to be able to do this, we need to be able to bring others along, pull them along on this journey, leverage the push and the pull, and make that aspirational vision that you all shared in the chat, the answer to question 2, make those a reality. So let's leverage the push and pull of the future right now. Let's think about the trends we talked about just now: brain-to-brain interface, radical life extension, digital values, social robotics. Wow, it's been a very exciting few minutes just in terms of the trends that we've talked about. The idea of leveraging the push and pull here is, in what ways can we avoid the threats that I know are apparent in all of those trends, but also capitalize on the opportunities presented by them? What do you all think? Are there any ideas that come to mind in terms of these trends that I shared? How can we leverage the trends that we talked about? Communication, brain to brain, radical life extension, digital values, social robotics, to transform our libraries. Share any thoughts that you might have in the chat. I'd love to hear how you all think we can leverage the push and pull of the future as it relates to these opportunity spaces. So I want you to think about those. I want you to think about what's possible for libraries. Exactly, Kate. It's not a threat if we see it early enough and we act upon it. It's only a threat when we allow it to sit there and we don't do anything about it. I love that you brought that up, Kate. A threat is an opportunity we did not see soon enough. Excellent. Other thoughts? Brain-to-brain interface, radical life extension, digital value, social robotics. How can we leverage these ideas to make libraries even better? I know you all have lots of thoughts. This is a great way to integrate this conversation in your libraries, in your communities, to make the future more accessible. These are, three very important principles within strategic foresight: the whole idea of outside in, the whole idea of putting people first, and this notion of the push and pull. Like, you can take someone through this in just a few minutes and they can begin to grasp the power of strategic foresight. So I love the ideas that are coming through here. Radical life extension gives us more leverage to lifelong learning. Absolutely, Susan. And this is what I'm talking about. So if you already have a strategy around lifelong learning, if we're trying to really promote that idea, then showing stats and data around radical life extension can only support that strategy. I see people talking about brain-to-brain interface. Nicole, I don't know if you want to jump in here. I have one more slide, just takeaway slide, but what's jumping out at you in terms of what we're sharing in the chat here?
It's interesting. Sarah said kind of redefining even in a genre. Like, if we're thinking of, stages of our life and experiences for those stages, is young adult? How do we redefine?
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a really, it's so funny how, and I know you are just a language phenom. You love talking about language, about how much of our language is tied to our traditional lifespans.
Yeah.
And those time, milestones and timings. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw, earlier, one of the major constraints was I want to be able to hire more people, to fill all the roles and the needs and the resources to serve our people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think of something like social robotics, right? Because another conversation we had in many of the cohorts where maybe I am a transformative leader or I'm an adaptive leader, but because of the shortage, I have to be more resilient. I can't be my adaptive, right?
Carla is saying exactly what you're saying here. Can manage my day-to-day library transactions, free me up to work on more of the high-level issues of librarianship.
Yes,
you and Carla are
on the same wavelength.
We need to save this chat because there's some great ideas. I'll continue the conversation in the chat as well. But I'll leave you with these final thoughts. Again, oops, I'm sorry about that. I'm certain that you all, feel like it was drinking through a fire hose sometimes when we go through a full TFS program. So let me ground you on things you can start doing right away if you're not already doing. Maybe some of these things you're already doing, to sort of lean into the three ways the future might surprise us, right? Those three principles that we talked about. So this is an easy one. The first one is super easy for librarians. Put people first. Let's make sure when we're talking about the future, we're hearing people talk about the future, that they're putting humans at the center of their visions about the future. This is how we can ensure that we're creating more equitable futures. If people start talking about AI, robots, and all of those things, that's all well and good, as long as our visions of the future have humans at the center. And we need to talk about how AI will impact, hinder, support, or help those humans, as an example. Put humans at the center of our visions, just like you put humans at the center of your libraries and the support you offer today. Challenge assumptions and outdated ways of thinking. We're all guilty of falling prey to our educated incapacity. If something sounds ridiculous, or if it challenges us, makes us feel weird, stop and ask yourself why, encourage yourself to solicit input from diverse perspectives and ask them what they think. And this is how you can overcome some of those biases and assumptions. Scan, 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 again, from the outside in. Use those aggregators to help you collect information, have the scanning come to you from across all of these state categories so that you're not just blinded by what's happening in libraries, in your communities. Scan from the outside in. And then pull yourself to the future. Make sure that you can answer that second question that I posed at the top of the presentation. If all obstacles were removed and you could direct what is done, what would you do? Make sure you know the answer to that. Make sure you're aligned with your leadership and your teams on the answer to that question, because we're all making decisions every day. We're all creating incremental action. We want to make sure that that incremental action that's keeping the lights on is moving us in the direction that we want to head. What is that direction? You might be surprised to find out that not everyone knows the answers to question 2. If all obstacles are removed, what are we here to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Make sure you're aligned on that aspirational vision and that your teams are aligned as well. And that'll put you put the future into focus. What do you think, Nicole?
You know, I think it's good. I'm a believer.
You're a believer.
I hope it re-energizes. I know it will re-energizes everyone to be like, yes, like that's why I was so drawn to this. And it's in a palatable way of those 3 principles to really take away and recommit. So wonderful.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. I'll stick around. I can't wait to hear from the panelists as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Yvette. And if you have not yet registered for a cohort, or if you're registered in an upcoming cohort, I hope that Yvette is always inspiring, and those little tantalizing things that she threw out, there's so much more. And thank you so much, Yvette. I always feel smarter after I listen to you and Nicole. Eventually, at the end of this program, I'll be half as smart as you. So thank you so much. I am very pleased. So we have some panelists who are going to share their experiences, challenges, opportunities. Also, at the end, we're going to listen to a team with actual implementation. So we're very excited about it. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Duncan Smith from EBSCO. He was the founder of Novelist, and now is the general manager for EBSCO's Innovation Information Services Novelist Division. He now is the chief strategist for public libraries. He's a certified Foresight practitioner and is working towards becoming a certified influencer. I want that. You got to talk to me about that, Duncan. So I'm going to turn it over to Duncan. Duncan, just let me know when you need me to advance.
Thanks, Dawn, and Yvette. Thanks for your grounding remarks here. That was really beautiful. Thank you. One of the things that Dawn asked us to talk about is why we believe in these tools and these resources. I'm spending a lot of time these days thinking about the future of the public library. I'm talking to a lot of people, I'm doing a lot of reading, and I'm exploring and I'm doing a lot of thinking. And I actually believe that the tools of Foresight have tremendous potential for helping us navigate the challenges that we're facing, that our profession is facing, and our institutions are facing, and our communities are facing today, as well as guide us towards a future that is more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. I'm at the very early stages of exploring this topic, and one of the tools that I'm using is causal layer analysis. And I'm at the very early stages of doing that as well, as you're about to see. I think it would come as a big surprise to many of you that the founder of Novelist would immediately be drawn to narrative transformation as a way to think about and put tools, Foresight, into practice. Basically, and I'm stealing, just like T.S. Eliot, from the Future School with some of their slides here. So anyway, when we think about the future and the stories that we tell ourselves about the future, we can sort of think about them almost like a book. Next slide there, right? Next slide, Dawn. Narrative transformation is about giving our stories a title, focusing on an issue and then looking at what the plot, the characters, the genres are there, looking at some themes that emerge from the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then maybe creating an image or a metaphor that can guide us into the future. And so what you're going to see in the next few slides is me focusing on some themes that I'm thinking about the future of the public library. Next slide. What is the future of the library's function? What's the public library's function in the future? Now, notice the word I'm choosing there, function, not staff, materials, building, resources. What's the function? And when I think about what the function of the public library is in the future, next slide, one of the things that I think about it is that the public library is the meaning-making place. It is the place that people come to find and discover meaning. And when I look at that as a concept, there are certain themes that emerge. One theme is scarcity to abundance. The public library got started, if I remember my history correctly, because Benjamin Franklin didn't have enough money to buy all the books that he wanted to buy. So he got a group of people together and said, let's pool all our money and we'll buy all these books and we'll share them. That was a scarcity situation. But where are we on the continuum of scarcity to abundance? Books aren't as scarce as they used to be now. They're more abundant. And what does that mean? Information isn't as scarce as it used to be. It's more abundant. Where is that leading us? And what are the challenges there? So, for example, you know, we have a lot more information than we had. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What does that mean for us in terms of helping people find and discover meaning? All right. The metaphor here is desert to jungle. Okay. If we look at echo chamber to curiosity, we know that many people are now seeking information or paying attention or having conversations that are designed to reinforce what they already believe. What about a continuum for the public library where we help people move out of their echo chamber and fuel their curiosity to genuinely seek and be open to discovering and asking questions about not only what their perceived reality is? And when I think about the metaphor for this, my metaphor is Ptolemy to Copernicus. Moving from someone who thought that the world revolved around them to someone who realized that the earth revolves around the sun, okay? So those are just two examples. If we go on to the next slide. Episodic versus relationship. In my experience, many of the public libraries' interactions or transactions are episodic and anonymous. They are infrequent. We don't have an opportunity to build long-term lasting relationships with our users. And just think about what the power of that is for someone who's starting a business. Starting a business isn't something that you do at the reference desk with a 30-second interaction. That takes years. To go back to Yvette's theme of radical life extension, what does that mean for the public library in the terms about what are the ground rules for how we interact with each other, okay? And build long-term lasting relationships. So for example, if we were able to stay with someone as they walk through the various stages of life, how might we be of better service and support to them? How might they educate us about other people that we could serve as well? My metaphor for this theme is flash fiction versus Game of Thrones. Okay. And then finally, collecting versus activating. We're very good at collecting resources and building collections and capturing expertise, but are we as good as activating those collections to have an impact on our communities and our people's lives? What if we shifted our focus from collecting to actually getting things used? getting things accessed and implemented that make a difference in people's lives? How might that shift our profession and shift the way we add value to our communities, and not only to our communities, but to ourselves? How might we feel if we had long-term lasting relationships where we knew that we were making a difference for someone or for our communities, and that we actually had the evidence and the tangible stories, that we heard those stories, we didn't just tell them, okay? So that is sort of where I am with playing around with this tool and this resource. If we go on to the next slide, I really think this is very important. You know, when I was in elementary school, I believed that history was this real thing, that we understood it and we knew exactly what happened back then when they signed the Declaration of Independence. We knew who was wearing what, and that was something that we could accept it as truth. What I've come to understand as I'm going to call myself a young adult, since I'm going to buy into that extended life thing, is that the past is imagined as much as any fantasy we ever tell ourselves. So why should an imagined past inform our tenuous present more than an envisioned future? Y'all don't have to answer it once later.
I mean, I have to unmute for that quote. I just have to. That was it. The proverbial mic should have dropped there. I feel like you should have kicked us off. I could have come in as a supplemental character here. Brilliant. I mean, everything you've said is brilliant. I think that quote is just really, really powerful, that we take the past as fact, and, you know, we sort of relegate these ideas of the future as something that is less than or not real. And they're all interconnected, and they're all just as real. And so I love this, Duncan. It's really, really powerful.
Thank you, Yvette. And, you know, and just to continue with the theme of democratizing the future, next slide, Dawn. This is very much a work in progress. So I want to invite any of you and all of you to send me your thoughts, ideas, comments. You know, I'm committed to continuing to play around with this concept. There's my very complicated email, and I may be over my time limit, which is okay. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. You are the dean of metaphors, and I have to share with everybody. I had the wonderful opportunity to spend more time with Duncan, and I can just share your thoughts with him. He's an important part of this network, and I can't tell you enough how thoughtful and informative and kind and just Duncan is, and we're very happy to have you here.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn my video off because I'm blushing right now. So
Thanks, Duncan.
All right.
I am so pleased to welcome Christina Steffi, who's at the Alvernia University. Oh, and I'm sorry, I just went through every single slide. She's the library director at the Alvernia University in Reading, Pennsylvania. And I'm so excited to have Christina share her experience from the academic library point of view, but also I think it's important to also share challenges. So I'm going to turn it right over to Christina, and let me know when you need me to advance.
All right. Actually, you can advance now. So thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as Dawn said, I'm the library director at Alvernia University. And I'm going to take some views on this about how this has impacted my professional development, some challenges I'm facing, and despite the challenges, why I think Foresight is still beneficial. So I'll start with how this has impacted professional development. I was a library director for 5 years before taking this training. And I was starting to do some of these things that we had talked about in the training, and I just kind of didn't realize that I was doing it. And I didn't have a grounding in the practice to know that I was actually doing everything correctly. And I didn't have the language to speak to, communicate this with leaders across campus. So when I found out about this training, actually David Runyon introduced me to it. I saw he was on this call. So hi, David. So when I heard about this training, I thought this is fantastic. I need to take this, because what I realized during my time as a library director was that this is the type of leadership training that really is lacking. And this is the kind of training that we all need. So much of the library training that I have encountered throughout my time as a librarian, that I still encounter, is all focused on here's what we did in the past, here's what we're doing now. And that's great. We do need to know how we got to where we are. We need to know what we're doing now, but it's missing the so what. Okay, now what do I do with this information? How do I use it? And that's what I wanted to do. And so since attending the futures training, that's really where I want my professional development to be in the future, is not just here's what we're doing, but where do we go from there? And I think if there's anything that COVID and the entire histories being reactionary, or the entire history of libraries being reactionary with budget cuts has taught us, it's the need to be ahead of the curve, and think about being ahead of the curve as before you read about it in the library literature. Because by the time it hits the library literature, if that's the only time you're hearing about it, you're behind the curve already. And so parts of your professional development should really be focused on how do you get ahead of the curve? And so how do you scan your environment, including what Yvette was talking about, those analogous fields. So, I have a higher education background, and we really must be scanning K through 12. And that is something that is often lacking. We see these trends coming if you're scanning K through 12. Students get here and higher education administrators are like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that would be a problem. I didn't see that coming. It's like, if you were paying attention, you would have seen it coming. We also need to be paying attention to business and technology and marketing. They're doing all of this user experience research, and they're shaping what patrons expect from us when they come to us, when they work with us. And of course, we have to be looking at our demographics. And this is especially true for higher ed. And something that also should be in our professional development is, what are those, what kind of students are we getting? Are we getting grad and adult students? Are we getting some of those traditional students, which we know that body is shrinking? So, and how does that type of student impact how they expect to interact with the library? So that environmental scanning absolutely must be part of futures and professional development. Futures training gets you in that mindset, and we need more of that. So next slide. And so although I clearly think that futures training is critical, that futures training gets you in the mindset and gets you thinking about things you really need to be thinking about that other professional development doesn't get you thinking about, the reality is that you may run into challenges to implementation, and I'm experiencing that right now. So I'm middle management, and my library exists in the larger university structure. So what I do depends heavily on support from university leadership. And in my case, I'm not constrained by what my leadership will allow, because they're fairly open to anything. They're big on education innovation. They want us to think big. The problem is I'm constrained by what they will fund. So thinking big and knowing how to get yourself in a place where you're anticipating these trends, where you're ahead of some things, that all comes with a price tag. So, theoretically, they may say, yeah, dream big, we support that. Practically, if I'm not getting funding to be able to move forward with these things, or even as we discussed earlier, to have the staff to not just be setting out fires all the time, but to go above and beyond that, then practically I'm not really getting the support, and I have a lot of resource constraints. And anyone who wants to be a strategic thinker and engage in strategic foresight will be constrained if there's not support from the top, but they're also going to be constrained if there's not support from people at all levels. You're all going to be working on these initiatives together, so you have to get buy-in. Or else you're going to have a very hard time engaging in any initiatives that you believe are necessary as you plan for the future. So buy-in of people believing in this mission, believing in what you're doing, in addition to getting the finances to go along with it. But I think these challenges show that this training, futures training and futures foresight, is so important for leaders to have, and so leaders at all levels of the organization, but also employees at all levels of your organization, because strategic foresight is not, or should not be, a one person or one department job. Next slide. So despite the challenges that I face and you may face, like I said, there really is value to foresight and futures training, even when you face these constraints, because you do need to engage in strategic planning. And the fewer resources that you have, the more critical this futures thinking and this strategic planning is, because you really, in some cases, you literally cannot afford to be surprised by anything. And even if your hands are tied with what you can do, as they were in my case, you can think about some of the exercises that we had that focused on different scenarios and understand that those had a lot of value. So the exercises that we had that focused on the different scenarios had us thinking about all the steps along the way. So a lot of times when people plan, you're like, here's what I want, here's where we are now, here's where we want to go. And bam, I'm going to go from point A to point Z, and it's just going to be fine and dandy, and everything's going to be perfect. It's going to work out well because here's how I think it's going to be. And that's not true. At each step along the way, you have things that happen that will impact how you can progress to your next step, if you can progress to your next step at all. And so the training that we did really helped us think that you can't just go from point A to point Z and ignore everything in the middle. You have to think, okay, here's what happens at A, then here's what's going to happen at B, then here's what's going to happen at C, and all of those points from here to there, and understand that at each step along the way, things can work out well, things can stay the same, or things can go really bad. And my group did the fortress scenario when we were doing this, and I think we all needed therapy after that because some of it got really dark and really bad. But you have to think about that. You have to understand that those things happen. You need to be able to manage each step of the process. And if you manage each step of the process, then maybe your end goal will be a bit closer to what you anticipated it will be. Because in reality, as everything happens, your end goal may not be as what you anticipated, but you can get it pretty close, or you can try to get it maybe better if you think about each of those steps along the way and plan. And one of the key lessons that I have learned since COVID, and that is something that you should learn as you're getting into the futures mindset, is that you can start to leverage these unplanned crises. Well, first of all, proactively plan for changes and disruptions. Yes, you do want to be doing that. Hopefully, if you are proactively planning for changes and disruptions, you won't have any unplanned crises, or they will be minimal because you've been thinking about what are some of the things that could happen. But futures training kind of gets you into the mindset of being able to leverage any unplanned crises and use them to your advantage to move forward, not backward. And what I mean by this is that what I see as a tragedy after everything with COVID is that we have so many libraries that, first of all, we're caught off guard with what happens if we can't deliver in-person services. So many people didn't think about that. So it was, now what do? Everything was tied to our physical space. In 2022, not everything should be tied to your physical space. So, but what we're running into now is that so many people are saying we just want to go back to normal. And I find that tragic, because that means that after everything with COVID, people just want to go back to the way things were before COVID and let go of all of those lessons learned, all of that accessibility that we opened up. And with futures thinking, you kind of get into the mindset where you can pivot, you can be flexible, you can be resilient. And so leverage these unplanned crises. When the crises subside, take these moments to pivot and plan and look for opportunities to improve moving forward, rather than just going back to the way things were. And Dawn will hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Christina. And I appreciate everything Christina said. It's about, and I appreciate the perspective that it can't just be one person, which is why my ultimate goal is to train every librarian in this country.
It's a big
we don't
goal.
know if that'll
It's a lofty goal, but we like it, Dawn. We're right. We're behind you 100%.
But we're getting there. We're getting there. So we're going to share a little tidbit of information at the end of the last panelists that we're getting there, right, Yvette and Nicole? We're getting there.
Yeah, and I just appreciate Christina so much. Just really sound advice. I dropped in the chat, and Nicole and I share a brain, so we hit on the same quote, which is the fewer your resources, the more critical foresight becomes. The irony, people, the irony, you can't afford to ignore the future. You can't afford to not apply this thinking. And again, hit on something where it has to be the whole organization. And I know that can seem daunting, and thinking about as a culture change can seem overwhelming. You take it one step at a time, but yeah, you're right. It cannot be isolated. You can't squirrel it away to one department. And so Christina's so helpful. Such great advice. You're doing such a great job applying what you learned. Thank you so much for your shares there.
Thank you, Yvette. And now I'm very pleased. So here's the thing with Sue. So the state of Pennsylvania, after my calculations, which involved 3 calculators, and some fingers.
3 calculators. It sounds like the people that were working overnight on the vote counts.
Yeah.
They had at least 3 calculators. I'm pretty sure.
And so Sue, the state of Pennsylvania has the most librarians, academic, school, public, and some special, trained right now in strategic foresight. Yay! So I'm very pleased to turn it over to Sue Banks, Deputy Secretary Commissioner of Libraries and State Librarian, and she was previously Director, my position development for the Office of Commonwealth Libraries. I'm going to turn it over to Sue and let her share her experiences and expertise and thoughts.
Okay. Although I'd like to just talk about stuff, but let me dump some of the plan stuff. First of all, welcome to everybody. And I want to shout out to all the Pennsylvania folks who are here today. Yay. Part of those 60 plus librarians from Pennsylvania. I volunteer Pennsylvania to be first on the list of trying to train every single librarian in the state in the future school and in futures thinking. Let's do it. Yes. Woo. Okay. So what's kind of interesting is I was thinking through the questions, and I did not do slides. So sorry, gonna have to just listen. Is what's interesting is seeing things from my point of view of the state librarian. I see the entire landscape of libraries in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to one extent or another, sometimes very deeply, sometimes kind of just shallowly, but I definitely see it as an ecosystem, which we talk about. I'm going to share a link in the chat to our 5-year plan, which I will say this work that we did influenced this plan. And hopefully, if you take a look at this plan, which is in a LibGuide, you'll see the hand of the training that we all went through. For me, that's probably one of the most important and one of the most concrete ways that we have managed to implement some of the things that we've learned. We used some of the tools in the discussions that we had, both wide and narrow. And one of the things that came out is actually, I sent a message out to all the folks who had been through the training when Don asked me to participate in this panel. And the first person to respond to me was, of course, my friend Christina. So she shared some of her thoughts, and then I saw she was on the panel too, and I'm like, yay. So we definitely have folks who have some cravings that this training created, clearly. And one of the things that I hope to do is really leverage that and capitalize on it in a big way. But in particular, getting to some of the things that Christina talked about in terms of the role of libraries in ecosystems that we exist in at the within education. That's a big one for us, especially, but in the world as well. So, gosh, okay, get on track, Sue. How is this influencing me? Well, from that point of view of being able to kind of see everything, it's also a challenge in trying to figure out how all of this training and the work that we talk about and the natural inclination that I carry. I've always been a pattern recognizer. When I first went through the training, which was, gosh, like over a year ago now, I think, maybe even longer. I don't even remember. But I was like, oh, this is the way that I've always thought. And it felt so natural. And I'm also a transformational thinker. So that all went into the way that I employ a lot of the things that I learned and the way that we employ them together, both inside of the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, which is library development, and the State Library of Pennsylvania. And a number of us from inside the organization went through the training. So that's working at the state level, but it's not really, the state library is a library, but library development is working with all libraries. So the challenge is to see it operate on this kind of indirect kind of scale. So that's one of the things that we keep talking about. We haven't really hit on the solution, but I think we're getting closer all the time. And the more people from Pennsylvania that we train, the more the grassroots desires bubble up. And I bet if we just did like, raise your hands, Pennsylvania people who want to create a community of practice, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to have these kind of conversations. And I hope Duncan will join us for at least one of them. But the idea that that practical application of planning, yes, and that has to be realized at the community level, and that's what's in that 5-year plan, is the idea that we're moving toward a Pennsylvania where libraries are at the center of the work to plan for the future of their communities, which makes for that much more meaningful and relevant and resilient organization and community that they serve. Absolutely. I believe in the viability of this route for sure. I have really appreciated and enjoyed the structure that the training provided to me to begin talking about some of these things that I've always done as kind of a hodgepodge of things that I read or studied or whatever, and that all finally comes together. And I'm looking forward to actually implementing slightly more structured approaches for the way that we work inside of Pennsylvania and the way that we set our priorities that way as well. For me, the looking at things and feeling the pull of the future, I am a consumer in a way that probably is not healthy of all information and a lot of popular culture, particularly through television. And one of the most interesting current experiences that I cannot wait for the next episode is Peripheral. If you have seen the TV show Peripheral, if you haven't, I recommend it. It's produced by the folks who did Westworld. The production values are great, but it really is a very practical examination of some of those what ifs that we just kicked around earlier in the meeting. And I think that those are some things like brain-to-brain connection. It actually shows that. What would that be like? And the first thing I started thinking about, because I'm a geek, is, wow, how could libraries or how could librarians engage in that? How would that affect librarians? How would it affect libraries? How would it affect library users? Because more than anything, and ask anybody who works for me, a lot of whom are here, the thing that we have to keep coming back to is the users of libraries, because that's why we exist. We don't exist to be librarians in a vacuum. We exist to help users of library services. So we need to understand the state of mind of the people who want or need to use libraries. And most of them, and you know this is true, don't even know it right now, that that's what they need, for all of the reasons that Duncan kind of introduced to in a lot of those ways. Okay. So how do we use these tools? I use them actually myself a lot. And I find myself going back to all of my notes from when I went through the training and all of that stuff. And I'm very much looking forward to engaging in additional training now that I'm through a kind of transfer of jobs. Because when I started, I was library development director, and now I'm state librarian. And that took a long time to sort out. And it's a very different job, which I'm just starting to get a handle on. And so much of it is informed by a lot of the processes that the training lays out. It really is. You have to work at that level. And what I am starting to understand is how much time you have to give yourself to do this work. It cannot be done on a day like today with back-to-back virtual meetings where you just go from one thing to the next and one thing to the next. You have to have the time to reflect. You have to have the time to imagine, and you have to have the time to think about things in an open way. That takes practice when you're used to being very practical and outcomes oriented. And it's like, do this project and manage this process and correct this problem and all of these things. That it is not really about that at all. You got to put your head in the right place. For the library profession, I'll go back and say again, I think this is the secret to libraries' success and survival in the coming decade, without a doubt in my mind. I've been in libraries for about 20 years, so I was kind of old when I started in libraries. But I came from the arts, and I saw the trends that were happening in the arts. And I see those trends, and I've seen those trends as time has moved on in libraries. And that's the way things show themselves to me. And there is no doubt in my mind that unless we begin working in the future to retool the present in order to get to a desired future that we all agree on, we're not going to be around, because there won't be any reason for us to be around. And there may come a time when we just need to get okay with that. That's the fortress kind of thing. Well, what if we all need to find new jobs? Then what kind of jobs are we going to do? Or what do we really need to make libraries become? What do libraries want to become? That's more the question. What do users of libraries want them to become? I could talk about and think about this stuff all day. In fact, I do. There's libraries, libraries in Pennsylvania, librarians, especially the library leaders who have been trained in this, are craving that support and engagement around the learning that we experienced in this training. They want it. They want it to keep going. You've heard that again and again, and I hear it all the time. And that's one of the hopes and plans that we have from the state level to actually make that happen and bring the different kinds of libraries together, since we tend to focus primarily on public libraries. But this is something that is for everyone and involves everyone. And really, that's pretty much what I had to bring. I'm looking at my notes and realizing I've pretty much covered everything, and anything else is kind of additional.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I see you as not only being an important part of this network, but being a huge advocate for continuing this type of training for all of our librarians. And I just can't thank you enough for everything.
I feel like we need to bottle
Yeah.
and
and absolutely.
That's what we need to just give out. That's what we need to give out to all of our current and future participants, because it's palpable. And no, I just appreciate so much the fact that you shared your long range plan and talked about how the training and Foresight was instrumental in that, because that's often what we need to build a business case. We need case studies and examples. And what you all have as a library community is so unique, because so many of you have had this training that you can point to so many examples from your colleagues, both every day and in long range planning, the whole gambit of ways that we've applied and you've applied this for success. So leverage those case studies to build the business case to continue the work in your communities as well.
Absolutely. And I'm pleased to bring us home now with Kendra Davey, the Literacy Initiatives Program Manager for the Pima County Public Library, and Renee Bibby, the Marketing Manager for the too many P's, Pima County Public Library, overseeing branch operations for 27 branch system. They're going to share their implementation. So welcome, Kendra and Renee.
All right, y'all, thank you for having us here. We are going to wrap up by speaking very specifically about a case in which we used the Futures Foresight, and we used it specifically with the anti-racism work that we're doing here at the library. For some context, we do live in Arizona, where there has been some legislative crackdowns on the use of critical race theory, but we are fairly fortunate that the local Pima County community has a stance, which is that there is room and space for us to do this work. So we know that we're in a particular situation of being allowed, quote unquote, allowed to focus on anti-racism efforts. So the way that we've been doing it in Pima County is that there are people in our community at different service levels who felt passionate enough about this to volunteer to be part of a team, which is made up of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, so BIPOC members as well. And we have a large representation of the Hispanic community in Southern Arizona, as you can imagine. So we have, representation across all of our communities in anti-racism, as well as some members of the team who we consider white allies. So they are also there to do that work. We are a team of about 15 people. We have some people had to step away and some people who have joined, and we actually have committed to meeting every week. We met every week for about a year and a half. We had a lot of work we had to do within the team in order to heal some racial trauma that had happened as members of the teams, personal members of the teams, BIPOC members articulated that they needed to sort of revisit the past and understand how to heal from the past. That was a very long journey. And then we were getting to the point where we were looking at how we were going to use a framework in order to move us forward through the planning for the larger community as Pima County Public Library. Now, Kendra went through the training before anybody else. I don't even know how you found it, but you found it and then brought it back and we're like, everybody needs to take this training.
An announcement through our state library,
Yeah,
saying that there was this opportunity, and my interest in similar to other speakers, this way of thinking without knowing I was interested in this way of thinking. But jumped on, it's like, oh, new tools.
Yeah. And then said, by the way, I'm separate from this. I'm a creative writer and I'm a science fiction writer. And so also that sort of future facing element. And so Kendra was like, BT Dubs, I think you might like this. And I was like, oh, I do. So she and I both went through this training and then understood that there was a way we could apply this really directly to the work we're doing with anti-racism teams. So today what we're going to talk about is two of the tools that we've used to get us through, and we're going to sort of give you the things that worked well and then the things that didn't work well. And one of the reasons that this particular tool felt like it was going to be a really good fit for the work we were already doing as an anti-racism team was that part of what we were encountering as a team was that we were having intellectual conversations about the way we could move the work forward. But some of the ways that people were feeling stalled out in the work was there was an emotional undercurrent that was very difficult to move past. So being really honest with you all, a lot of the BIPOC team members in our group had a lot of hopelessness about the work and what we could possibly do for the future. One of the team members even said, I don't even know what to hope for. That a lot of the systemic issues that we've seen within libraries, and let's be honest, in the United States, had put some of the team members in a position where focusing on the future felt really dangerous and felt that they were setting themselves up for problems. Now, what was really great is that we, in deploying some elements of this type of planning, allowed us to sort of to address some of those emotional undercurrents. And the first one I was really excited to hear Duncan talk about causal layer analysis, because it's a very small part of the training that we did, but it had one of the greatest emotional impacts for me personally was understanding that if we can get ourselves down to a really deep level, where currently that's the darkest part of some of the work. And that's where we're seeing really deep roots of white supremacy that is damaging to BIPOC communities, but also our white allies and white people. Like, it's damaging to all of us as humans. If we could get down to those really dark roots and transform them into something positive, that we could also create an emotional shift with that.
And I think one of the things that really helped the white ally team as we were having our discussions is, for a long time, we were just really comfortable in the top two layers, talking about the facts and talking about system structures and actors in a very academic way and using very academic language in how what we are talking about kind of divorced from our personal responsibility in the damage that we were causing. And the CLA helped our white allies start to move towards those deeper levels that they had not had to address, because that is the privilege we have as white people, is to not have to get down to the feelings level. And so, you know, a lot of where we were struggling with as a team is people talking up here and people feeling down here. So that that allowed us to start to move to deeper levels and get at some of the same feelings, obviously from different perspectives, from different experiences, but start to understand that that's what was happening.
And the reality is, and you can go to the next slide. So we had to recreate, because we ended up having to be in a space where we needed people. Speaking of, I saw someone in the chat talking about how Google Tools was something that emerged. Yeah, for us as well, because Google Tools are free and they're a place where everybody can come together, right? So we use Google Tools to create this really awesome board. And this was a place where we're using Google Jamboards, and a place like, everyone go here, we're gonna do this work. It had some limitations, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what was interesting was that even in this space, as we were like, let's go down to the root, sort of like really deep layers and sort of unpack things, it was really difficult for us, for everyone, not just BIPOC team members, to understand how the myths and the mythology and metaphors are being perpetuated within our day-to-day life. So if you go to the next slide, what we decided to do was to talk about, we sort of stepped away from racism just to sort of practice this idea of going a deep dive. And we really said, okay, let's look at this idea that men are better than women. If we sort of see that there's this world value and culture about men being better than women, right? And that this is something that exists and is communicated in our communities. What are the things that help, like where did you learn that? And when did you learn that? And we asked everybody to use just visual representation, to not use words, because again, we're trying to move away from this idea that it's an intellectual exercise. Like, where at a fundamental life sort of formative moment did you learn something about how society understands your role and the role of women? So, people, and actually people on the left put up a bunch of images, ways that we've sort of understood, and some of those were incredibly personal. People were putting up like very specific images that connected to their own families. And then of course the people were putting up like I learned it from this particular movie, I learned it from this particular show. And so then when we said, okay, so, and actually I didn't actually capture it all, because if you go to the next slide, what we then had everybody do is say, if we were to understand that men and women come from a place of valuable, that both everyone is bringing something of value, what are the ways that, if we can reframe that and see the places in which we're starting to see that being reframed, where are you also learning that this message can and does exist? And so then this was a place where everybody, and this is interesting. Of course, you can see there's a lot of layers of images. And so I actually had to go back and take those out in order to get to that first slide, the slide I just showed. This moment, if everyone just dropping in their images, being like, these are the places where we're starting to see it shift. These are the things where we can understand that there's a better, like literal, fantastical narratives about it. There's actual human beings who are helping us understand that this is a way we can transform. This was a really sort of emotionally pivotal moment for us as a team to understand how impactful reframing that fundamental myth, mythology can be in how we approach that work.
Mhm.
So that was great. And again, but it was still happening sort of separately from the actual work. We needed to sort of do some of that sort of like, okay, let's get into this emotionally. But then we also, of course, are still doing this work in the context of human accounting and what we're trying to do here. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we started looking at, and this is going to be difficult, you won't be able to read it, which is fine because it's really sort of very personal to the team. But we started with this idea or fact, which is that PCPL has no formal way to involve the community in planning programs. And so then we did a deconstruction again of like, and this was the whole team, everybody in the same place, practicing what a causal layer analysis was. Everybody was in that Jamboard, jamming it up with a lot of content, as you can see, and it sort of spanned the breadth and depth of experiences that we had. So from there, again, sort of practicing at the larger team, what the teams did, everybody broke out into smaller groups, and some of the work of scanning that, is really integral to this process. We kind of had already done that as a team, and it was actually, we decided to keep it fairly focused within sort of the scope of PCPL, because that's where the fundamental change needed to happen. So we had these litany of facts, and people did a bunch of work in smaller subgroups doing causal layer analysis, really getting at the root of things and understanding how we need to shift some of the white supremacist sort of ideologies that exist, move them over, and then go back up and reframe things, right? So if you go to the next slide, what we ended up is then we looked at all the ways that things had been reframed and then looked for points of intersection. So the ways they had reframed the quote unquote facts within PCPL could then be put into the 4 pillars, could be basically sorted into 4 pillars of information about what we see as the priorities for our anti-racism work as a team. So did you want?
I just wanted to say, we did a presentation last week about the future school and the strategic foresight process for state library leaders in Arizona. And it was just an overview so that everyone could understand that. And hopefully we can bring this to Arizona. So every librarian in Arizona, and sign me up for that, gets trained on this. And we had the group do a causal layered analysis based on the conversations they had the previous day. Their fact was change is hard. And they were 5 small groups, and they all got to almost exactly the same place in a 15-minute conversation that we were pushing them fast just so they could feel it. But I think that again shows that even really quickly, you can get to those underlying mythologies and that help people really understand how they have to frame the entire issue. And it was interesting to see it work even really quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so that also really created this really powerful sort of, like I said, emotional shift for the team that like, oh, we now have some idea of like how we're going to sort of really undercut what is essentially the ways that structural racism exists in library systems. But so the phase that we are on now actually is we're actually looking at scenarios. But before we sort of move on, can you go to the next slide? So this really great, the driver's wheel, which is from the Future School, and we have it up on the screen because it's beautiful and well designed. And if you go to the next slide, you can see what we ended up using instead, because again, we needed to be in a space where we were where everyone could collaborate. We were using a free tool, and we sort of laid it out this way. And to be fair, one of the things we wanted to sort of acknowledge is that like they have agreed that some of the ways that they've set the tools up are more effective, because one of the things, well, maybe you can talk about how the setup we used maybe was not as impactful.
Yeah, so we were trying to get at that futures wheel, moving from 1 to 5 years to 10 years to 20 years. And I was in the group. Renee is more the facilitator of the conversation, so she drops in on the different groups, but I was with our group as we moved through this, and really became clear to me that the tools do really guide the conversation. So structurally, this might look similar, but how it played out was it was really hard for our group to move from that what you do in 1 to 5 years of affects what happens in 10 years. And so it was more like scattershot. We could do this, we could do that, we could this, and they weren't moving directly from one thing to the next thing. And it was really hard to wrangle their thoughts into connecting how this action we take in 2023 frames the action that happened 20 years later. Well, I felt like we spent a lot of time spinning our wheels, and that was difficult, where I think the tool, the future's wheels, helps people visualize this thing leads to this thing, which leads to this thing, whether purposefully or accidentally. And I think that makes a really big difference in how people understand the push and the pull of the future.
So the last note we'll just sort of wrap up on is to acknowledge that there is a great idea that there are some tools in which they're structured in a way that's going to help. It's design thinking, right? Like the tool itself is going to help you move your people through those sorts of things. And then, so the place where we are now as a team is we're doing some of the work. We did bring in the which world sort of process, and we were going to start building out scenarios, but I want to acknowledge that like the Fortress market and transformative framework is also something, and that helped with the emotional approach that staff were taking with this work with anti-racism, because they were really disheartened. One of the things that the Fortress world allowed us to do is like, great, let's lean into that. Let's acknowledge that it may not work. And if we understand that that is a possible future, we're acknowledging their sort of emotional reaction to that actually sort of freed people up to move forward.
Yeah.
So that has proven really, really impactful.
Yeah, and I think also what was really helpful for our white ally team is to recognize that those three worlds actually are coexisting all the time, right? Some of us are able to live in a transformative or market world, while some of us have always been in a fortress world. And one thing can be in a fortress world and another thing can be in a transformative world. And I think that was really helpful for framing discussions, and then also really understanding that transformative doesn't mean you have no work to do, and fortress doesn't mean you have no transformation that's possible. It's how you do the work that changes, not, and maybe what you can do and the extent to which you can do it, or the effort needs to be different. But all this work is possible in every iteration of the world. And actually we are doing it in every iteration of the world. And we can't pretend that that stuff isn't going on. So it's been really, really great to have these tools as a way to really get our work moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm this is why we're going to have a network, because there's just so much to share. There is just so much to, one of the goals of the network is to continue to share these communities of practice, the work that you're doing, the implementation that you're doing, but also to continue to advocate that this is important. Ashley just dropped in that we have two cohorts coming up. Here's the actual special announcement is that IMLS has invited us to submit a proposal to extend our cohorts out. So send our cohorts out to library systems, library states, entire states. And I think Arizona is one of those that's going to be because Holly has just been so, we need that advocate. We need those advocates. We need people to talk about this. Sue, we need you to talk about this because it's so important that as a core competency, and I know, I don't know if Chance is still here with us, but the library schools, that's another part of the goal of the grant, is to get the library schools involved in this. And obviously we can really get, do some training, maybe do a cohort for students. So to get them before they're sent out into the world. So yep, Chance, I'll be talking to you about that for opportunity. So I just want to know, I know we're running a little bit over time. If anybody's, you're welcome to stay on. I don't have anywhere to go, but If you have any questions, if you have any comments, we're working on advocacy. We're stay connected with the network. Ashley included that in the chat. We need to bring our voice together. I'm doing some work with Stacey Aldrich at the LibX Learn conference in New Orleans in January. We're going to do worst case scenarios, crazy scenarios. Continue talking with your colleagues, with your leaders, with your partners. I know we couldn't do any of this without the amazing with Frank and Yvette and Nicole and Angela and Ashley Bowers and Ashley Sklar, that they're so they're helping us democratize the future for librarians, and we could not do this without them, because it's their belief and that crazy idea. Would you like to work with librarians? And really, they just see it's so incredibly important. So, does anyone have any comments, suggestions? Stay involved. Pop into the partnership. I think we're gonna do a little bit more work about sharing these community practice. Yep, Kate, that's an excellent idea. We actually, I do send this to library boards. We are really focusing on librarians right now, because the intent of the grant is for the training for librarians from all academic school, public and special libraries. We've had some independent consultants, because that's important as well, but that's certainly an opportunity as well. Anybody, any last thoughts, any final words of this wisdom, Yvette and Nicole? Anybody else?
I feel like I've gotten all the wisdom from the panelists and from this group. This has definitely filled my cup. It's great to do what we do and to facilitate this work. And we know we touch people, but to hear the stories of how you all are impacting your communities and your staff with these really, really, really powerful conversations, facilitated in part by the tools that we've provided you all. To say that it's humbling is an understatement. And we know that you all are the key. The key to the future of our communities is in this room. And we could not think of a better group to empower and unlock this ability within, because you all are already futurists. We just gave you the tools and the permission and empower you, and we're cheering you all the way. Let us know how we can continue to support your work. And Dawn, the amazing Dawn, not enough of us to clap for you today, because you are the reason why any of us are here. And thank you for entrusting us with this incredible piece of work that is going to be a cornerstone of our careers from this point forward. So thank you so much for putting that trust in us. We really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're my other family. So thank you so much. Any final comments, remarks? Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, to Christina, to Duncan, to Sue, to Renee, to Kendra. We're really amazed. And keep an eye on your email, in your inbox of your email. We're going to be communicating progress on these additional opportunities. Yes, Duncan, library schools, we would love to have that conversation. Yes, Chance, I will be in touch. Anybody, any other thoughts? Share. So we deeply appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.